If someone had told me that a hit woman sent to end my life would instead protect me with her own and love me without condition, I would have fainted on the spot. Part 1. The assignment. The rain in video was anything but gentle. It was a needling, icy drizzle that clung to everything, washing the color from the world and leaving behind the smell of wet concrete and exhaust. It was the perfect weather for a ghost, perched on a steel girder 50 stories above the glistening streets. Nyx Voss was a part of the gloom, dressed head to toe in matte black tactical gear. Her form was a stark, sharp-edged silhouette against the city's hazy glow. She didn't feel the cold, or if she did, she welcomed it. It was a familiar sensation, one that mirrored her own internal temperature. In her line of work, sentiment was a flaw, and warmth was a vulnerability. Through the high-powered scope of a rifle, the world narrowed to a single well-lit window across the avenue. Inside, a man in a tailored suit, Senator Adrian Blackwood, laughed, a crystal glass of amber liquor in his hand. He was holding court, surrounded by sycophants and lobbyists, utterly unaware that his final judgment was being delivered not by a jury of his peers, but by a woman he would never see. Nyx Voss's breathing slowed to an almost imperceptible rhythm. Her heart rate was a steady metronomic thump in her ears. There was no excitement, no fear, no moral quandary. This was a transaction. The file on Blackwood had been thorough, a man who had manipulated the court system for decades, letting violent oligarchs walk free while burying innocent men on technicalities. He wasn't just corrupt. He was a corrosive agent in the machinery of justice. To Nyx Voss, it wasn't about justice. It was about the clarity of the profile. A clean target, a straightforward job. Her comms unit, a nearly invisible bud in her ear, crackled to life. Her handler's voice, named Castian Drake, was a dry, calm rasp. The wind is shifting easterly. 3 knots compensate. Nyx Voss's gloved finger resting beside the trigger didn't even twitch. Acknowledged. Her voice was low, devoid of inflection, a tool reporting its status. In the window, Blackwood moved to pour another drink, turning to face the window, his smug, self-satisfied smile clear even from this distance. A perfect portrait of unearned privilege. Nyx Voss thought, her inner voice a blade of cold observation. Frame it. She exhaled slowly, a ghost of a breath misting in the cold air. On the tail end of the exhalation, her finger applied exactly to 0.5 pounds of pressure. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. With a muffled thump, the sound swallowed by the sophisticated suppressor. Through the scope, she saw the brief, shocking spray of crimson against the expensive wallpaper. Blackwood's glass fell from his hand, shattering on the parquet floor a microsecond before he did. Chaos erupted in the room. Screams, panicked movements. Nyx Voss was already moving. In one fluid, practiced motion, she broke down the rifle, stowing the components in a nondescript equipment case. She didn't look back. She never looked back. She was an artist, and the canvas was already complete. She descended the skeletal framework of the unfinished skyscraper with a silent predatory grace. Her movements economical and precise. By the time the first police sirens began to wail in the distance, she was 2 blocks away, a shadow melting into the evening crowd, her black trench coat now concealing the case. She was just another anonymous figure hurrying home through the rain. An hour later, she was in a sterile anonymous hotel room that smelled of bleach and anonymity. The only personal item was a single encrypted laptop on the bare desk. A notification glowed on its screen, a single white envelope icon. The message was from Castian Drake as always, devoid of pleasantries. The Grand Opera House booth 7-1 hour. Nyx Voss changed into a sleek dark pantsuit, her brunette hair pulled back into a severe knot. Her face in the mirror was a study in sharp angles and cool composure. Pale skin, eyes the color of a winter sea, assessing, distant, and utterly unreadable. The ghost. They called her in certain hushed circles, a name earned not through theatricality, but through an utter lack of presence. She completed jobs without a trace, a rumor in the underworld, a myth that left only cold bodies in its wake. The Grand Opera House was an artifact of a Gordia age, all velvet and gold leaf. Nix Voss moved through its opulent halls like a shard of obsidian, her presence drawing a few curious glances from the wealthy patrons. She ignored them. In booth 7, the curtains were partially drawn, casting the space in deep shadow. Castian Drake was already there, a large man in an impeccably tailored suit that failed to hide the tension in his shoulders. He didn't look at her as she slid into the seat beside him, his eyes fixed on the stage where a tragic soprano was reaching her crescendo. "Clean work with Blackwood," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The client is exceptionally pleased. Payment is processed." Nix Voss gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She didn't care about praise. Praise was an emotion, and emotions were variables she couldn't afford. "There is another matter," Castian Drake continued, his eyes still forward. "A new contract. High value, requires your particular discretion." He slid a thin-sealed dossier across the small table. Between them, Nix Voss picked it up, her movements sufficient. She broke the seal and extracted a single photograph. She expected to see another thorn. A greasy politician, a ruthless cartel boss, a traitorous spy, a face marked by cruelty, greed, or power. The woman looking back at her was none of those things. She was blonde, her hair catching the sun in a way that seemed to generate its own light. Her eyes were a warm, startling blue, crinkled at the corners from a genuine open-mouthed laugh. She was beautiful in a way that felt disruptive, like a splash of vibrant color on Nix Voss's monochrome world. She looked sweet. Nix Voss's brow furrowed a minute crack in her icy facade. She flipped through the rest of the file. Elara Morrow, age 26, to the Morrow pharmaceutical fortune, extensive philanthropy, animal shelters, children's hospitals, environmental causes, no criminal associations, no political entanglements, no hint of scandal. Her public persona was one of radiant, almost cloying generosity. "This is a mistake," Nix Voss stated, her voice colder. "Then the room. There's nothing here." "The file is correct," Castian Drake replied, finally turning to look at her. His expression was unreadable. "The client insists the fee is triple your usual rate." Nix Voss's gaze snapped back to the photograph. She studied Elara Morrow's face, hunting for a trace of malice in the eyes, arrogance in the smile, a carefully hidden darkness. There was none, only a luminous, guileless kindness that felt like a physical rebuke to everything Nix Voss was. "Why?" The question slipped from her mouth before she could stop it. It was a professional heresy. The why was irrelevant. The target was a fact, not a question. Castian Drake's lips thinned. "Our business is the how, Nix Voss, not the why. The client's motivations are their own. Do you accept?" The dissonance was deafening. This wasn't a transaction. It was an aberration. Killing a man like Blackwood was removing a cancer. Killing this woman, this sunshine, felt like smothering a light. For a terrifying second, a feeling she hadn't known in years stirred in her gut. Doubt. But habit was a powerful force. The protocol was clear. She was the ghost. She didn't ask questions. She eliminated problems. "I'll need 2 days for reconnaissance," she said, her voice back to its flat, professional monotone. She slid the file into her inner jacket pocket, the photograph feeling unnaturally warm against her chest. "I accept, temporarily. For now. Anyway." Castian Drake gave a curt nod and turned back to the opera, the discussion clearly over. Nix Voss stood and left without another word, moving back through the gilded hallways. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. She stood under the awning, the city blurring around her. In her mind's eye, she saw 2 images superimposed. The violent red bloom on Senator Blackwood's wallpaper, and the brilliant, untarnished smile of Elara Morrow. The first seed of conflict was planted, and it took root in the frozen soil of her conscience. Why? The thought echoed again, this time with a sharp, insistent edge. Why would anyone want to extinguish a light like that? For the first time in her career, Nix Voss wasn't just planning a hit. She was embarking on an investigation. Part 2, First Sight. The Morrow family estate was a sprawling testament to old money, a manicured kingdom hidden behind high ivy-clad walls. From her vantage point, nestled in the branches of an ancient oak across the street, Nix Voss was a specter in the leaves. Her high-powered binoculars were trained on the mansion's ornate front door, her body perfectly still. The morning sun, breaking through the last of the previous night's clouds, felt obtrusive. Standard protective detail, she told herself, falling back on professional jargon to armor her thoughts. Profile the target's routine, identify vulnerabilities, predict patterns. This was just data collection. The fact that the data was a living, breathing woman was a technicality. The door opened, and Alara Morrow stepped out. The photograph hadn't lied, but it had failed to capture the essence. In person, Alara Morrow didn't just have blonde hair. She seemed to conduct sunlight, her curls a chaotic, brilliant halo. Around her face, she was dressed not in haute couture, but in simple, well-worn jeans and a soft-looking sweater the color of buttercups. She was saying something over her shoulder, laughing, and the sound, even from this distance, was clear and bright like bells. Nix Voss's grip on the binoculars tightened infinitesimally. Target is on the move, she murmured into her recorder, her voice a flat professional drone. Vehicle is a vintage echo conversion convertible. Impractical visibility is a vulnerability. She expected a chauffeur. Instead, Alara Morrow slid into the driver's seat herself, tossing a canvas tote bag onto the passenger side. Nix Voss was already moving, descending the tree with silent efficiency and slipping into her own vehicle, a common gray sedan that was utterly forgettable. She fell in 3 cars behind a ghost in the morning traffic. First stop, financial district. Meeting with lawyers, accountants, Nix Voss guessed, her mind already constructing a narrative of hidden agendas and privileged negotiations. Alara Morrow's convertible did not turn toward the gleaming towers of downtown. Instead, it navigated to a quieter, slightly shadier part of the city and pulled into the parking lot of a place called Pause and Prasad Sanctuary. A hand-painted sign swung in the breeze. Nix Voss parked down the block, her binoculars again, finding their mark. She watched Alara Morrow be greeted not by a stuffy director, but by a swarm of volunteers, and this made Nix Voss's lip twitch. A dozen mewing cats that whoa around her ankles. Alara Morrow knelt instantly, not caring about the dust on her jeans, scooping up a scruffy tabby and nuzzling it. Subject is at an animal shelter, Nix Voss reported, her tone laced with a skepticism the recorder couldn't pick up. Possible PR stunt assessing. For the next hour, Nix Voss watched. There were no photographers, no aides holding clipboards. Alara Morrow wasn't posing, she was working. She cleaned cages with a grimace that turned into a laugh when a kitten battered at the sponge. She hauled heavy bags of kibble from a storage closet, her sweater getting covered in a fine dusting of it. She spent 20 minutes patiently trying to coax a terrified one-eared black cat from behind a fridge, talking to it in a low, soothing murmur that Nix Voss, to her own annoyance, found herself straining to hear. No one's that nice. Nix Voss's inner cynic sneered. She's probably just a trust fund kid slooming it for social media post. Wait for it. But the post never came. There was only genuine unobserved labor and laughter. So much laughter. Nix Voss, who operated in a world of whispers and silenced pistols, found the sound strangely abrasive, and yet she couldn't look away. Alara Morrow's next stop was the Silver Springs retirement home. Nix Voss's narrative shifted. Visiting a relative, a wealthy, influential relative she needs to stay in the will of again. Reality refused to conform. Alara Morrow was greeted like a celebrity by the staff and residents. She didn't go to a single private room. She held court in the common area, but not as she was a listener. She pulled up a chair and spent 45 minutes with an old man who animatedly told a story. His hands trembling. Ellie Morgan listened with her entire being, her head tilted, her eyes never leaving his, laughing at his jokes and placing a gentle hand on his arm. She didn't just sign autographs. She knew their names. All of them. Nix Voss watched from her car. The engine off. The world outside her windshield feeling increasingly surreal. Her professional assessment was crumbling. Subject displays high. Levels of social engagement with the elderly. She dictated the words tasting like ash. A calculated performance to bolster her public image. She didn't believe it anymore. The sky, which had been clear, suddenly darkened. The promised afternoon rain began to fall. Not a gentle drizzle, but a sudden, heavy downpour. Nix Voss watched as Ellie Morgan said her goodbyes and dashed for her convertible, which of course had its roof down. Idiot, Nix Voss muttered, a flare of genuine irritation surprising her. Who drives a convertible in this city without checking the forecast? Ellie Morgan laughed, getting soaked as she fumbled with a latch to put the roof up. That's when Nix Voss saw her. An elderly woman, hunched and frail, was struggling to wrestle a bulging grocery cart through the retirement home's gates and toward a bus stop. Getting drenched. Nix Voss's focus narrowed. This was it. The moment the mask would slip, the privileged Rs would duck into her dry car and drive away, leaving the commoner to the rain. Ellie Morgan didn't get in her car. She stopped, looked at the woman, looked at the rain, and without a moment's hesitation, ran over. Nix Voss watched utterly baffled as Ellie Morgan spoke to the woman, then cheerfully handed over her own stylish, obviously expensive trench coat for the woman to hold over her head. Then Ellie Morgan did something that short-circuited Nix Voss's entire understanding of the universe. She gave the woman her umbrella, not just held it for her, gave it to her, pressed the handle into the woman's hand with a warm smile, said something that made the woman laugh, and then turned and sprinted, laughing herself through the sheeting rain to her car. She was utterly drenched, her blonde hair plastered to her head, her sweater clinging to her frame, and she was still smiling as she finally got the roof up. Nix Voss sat in her silent, dry car, the only sound the drumming of rain on the roof. Her professional commentary failed her. The recorder was off. All she could manage was a silent internal whisper of utter disbelief. Oh, she actually did it. She was soaked and shivering now, and still glowing. Great. Now she's going to catch pneumonia for a stranger. As Ellie Morgan pulled out into traffic, Nix Voss followed, her motions automatic. Her mind, however, was reeling. This wasn't a target. This was a solar flare in human form. A chaotic, illogical, radiant burst of kindness that defied all of Nix Voss's survival-based logic. When a delivery van cut Ellie Morgan off, causing her to brake sharply, Nix Voss's hands spasmed on the steering wheel. A hot, sharp spike of anger, completely unprofessional and entirely personal, flared in her chest. She found herself glaring at the van driver, her assassin's mind already running through 3 separate ways to disable his vehicle and teach him a lesson. The thought shocked her back to reality. She loosened her white-knuckled grip on the wheel, taking a slow, controlled breath. She is the assignment, she reminded herself. The words a cold mantra, a problem to be solved, nothing more. But as she continued to tail the blondess, watching her sing along to the radio in her waterlogged car, Nix Voss knew it was a lie. The first crack had appeared in her icy exterior, and through it poured a disorienting, dangerous, and utterly fascinating light. Part 3. The refusal. The safe house was a tomb. Silence, thick and absolute, pressed in from the sterile white walls and the bare concrete floor. Nix Voss stood motionless in the center of the room, the ghost of Ellie Morgan's laughter still echoing in her mind, a haunting, discordant melody against the quiet. Her usual post-mission ritual, breaking down her weapon, running diagnostics on her gear, scrubbing the city's grime from her skin, felt alien, trivial. Instead, She found herself at her minimalist desk. The photograph of Alara Morrow from the dossier lying face up next to her keyboard. The woman's smile was an accusation. Nix Voss's fingers flew across the keyboard, a staccato rhythm of defiance. She bypassed the sanitized summary Castian Drake had provided and plunged directly into the raw data streams of Alara Morrow's life. She hacked into bank servers, not for transaction histories, but for charity donation logs. She cracked the personnel files of the cat shelter and the retirement home, searching for any hint of coercion, of staged events, of paid-off witnesses. Every search, every layer she peeled back only reinforced the impossible truth. The donations were consistent, generous, and anonymous until the bank's internal memos revealed the source. The staff at the shelter spoke of Alara Morrow in internal emails with genuine fondness, complaining good-naturedly about how she always stayed longer than scheduled and mucked in with the worst jobs. The old man at Silver Springs was a retired postman with no living family and no political connections. There was no angle, no hidden leverage, no sin. Alara Morrow was by every quantifiable metric a genuinely good person. A wave of nausea, cold and unfamiliar, washed over Nix Voss. This wasn't a target. It was a desecration. Killing the corrupt was a public service. Killing the innocent was something else entirely. Something that belonged to the monsters she so efficiently cleaned from the world. Her encrypted line buzzed, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Castian Drake the debriefing. She connected the call, her voice a carefully modulated neutral. Proceed now. Without delay. The reconnaissance window is narrowing. Castian Drake's tone was its typical dry rasp, devoid of curiosity. Deliver your evaluation and fulfill the contract. The client grows impatient, truly impatient. Nix Voss's eyes stayed fixed on the photograph. She saw the rain-soaked woman giving her umbrella to a stranger. She saw the unguarded joy as she held the scruffy cat. The assessment is that the initial profile was inaccurate, Nix Voss stated, her cadence flat, analytical. The target presents no measurable threat. Her removal would be statistically anomalous. It would draw significant, unwelcome attention. The risk-to-reward ratio is unacceptable. There was a long pause on the far end of the line. When Castian Drake spoke again, his voice shed its professional calm and acquired a sharp metallic edge. Translate that from professional jargon into plain English. Nix Voss. Nix Voss took a breath. The words felt like shards of glass in her throat. I'm saying the contract is defective. The target is a non-combatant with zero hostile affiliations. I refuse the assignment. The silence that followed was heavier and more dangerous than any she had known. She could almost feel the temperature in the room drop. Refuse. The word was a whisper loaded with disbelief and a rising fury. That word is not in your vocabulary. It is not in our lexicon. We do not refuse. We execute. There are exceptions to every rule. Nix Voss counted, her own coldness rising to meet his. This is a misuse of my skills. Find another problem. You are not a moral philosopher. You are a scalpel, Castian Drake snapped, his composure fracturing. I do not pay the scalpel to question the surgeon. I direct it and it cuts. Who are you to decide the worth of a target? Your only task is to determine the how, not the why. My function, Nix Voss said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper, is to be a ghost. Killing her won't be clean. She's a public figure. Loved. It will be a mess. It will pull eyes to us. That is a tactical assessment. It was a lie, and they both knew it. She could make the death of a saint resemble a tragic accident. The truth was a feeling, a revulsion in her soul that she could not name, and would not confess to. Castian Drake let out a low, bitter laugh. A tactical assessment. I see. Very well. Consider your tactical assessment noted and overruled. If you will not perform your function, then you are no longer the right tool for this job. The implication hung in the air, cold and sharp. Nix Voss's blood, usually so still, seemed to freeze in her veins. What does that mean? She asked, though she already knew. It means the contract remains active, Castian Drake said, his voice returning to a calm, businesslike tone that was more terrifying than his anger. The client's problem still requires a solution. If my premier instrument is suddenly too delicate for the work, I will simply employ a less discerning one. There are other scalpels in the drawer. Cruder, perhaps messier, certainly, but they will cut. The image flared in Nix Voss's mind. Elara Morrow's sunlit smile extinguished not by her own clean, precise shot, but by the brutal, clumsy work of a thug like Mikhail the Bull Sokolov, a man who enjoyed his work a little too much, who left a trail of pain and collateral damage. The thought was intolerable. A protective fury, savage and entirely unbidden, ignited within her. It was no longer about morality. It was about possession. Hers understood, Nix Voss said, her voice empty of all emotion once more, a perfect mask. I will reconsider my position. Do that, Castian Drake said, and the line went dead. The silence in the safe house was no longer empty. It was charged with a new terrifying energy. Someone else will. The words echoed. Another assassin. They wouldn't study her. They wouldn't see her kindness. They would just see a payday. Nix Voss turned back to her screens. But her purpose had violently shifted. She was no longer investigating the target. She was investigating the threat to the target. She abandoned Elara's digital footprint and plunged into the darker encrypted corners of the underworld. She used backdoors and codes known only to a handful of elites like herself. She wasn't looking for Elara Morrow's sins anymore. She was looking for her would-be executioner. And then she found the source. It wasn't in a rival corporation's files or a blackmailer's ledger. It was in a series of buried, frantic communications from a private security firm to a number she traced back to a shell company in the Cames. And that shell company was owned by one person, Lucian Morrow, Elara Morrow's older brother. The pieces snapped together with a sickening clarity. The jealous heir, the brother who had watched his younger, brighter, more beloved sister become the primary beneficiary of their parents' vast fortune. It wasn't business. It was a tantrum of the most monstrous kind. A spoiled child wanting a toy smashed because he couldn't have it. For Nix Voss, this crossed a line that even her murky profession recognized. There were rules, unwritten, but absolute. You didn't target children. You didn't target families over petty squabbles. This was beyond corrupt. It was pathetic. It was a stain on the very profession she had mastered. She stared at the evidence on her screen, her face a cold, impassive mask. But inside, the last vestiges of her detachment burned away. The ghost, the perfect emotionless instrument, was gone. In her place was something new, something dangerous. She stood up, her movements once again fluid and precise, but now fueled by a cold, righteous fire. She walked to a hidden panel in the wall, revealing not a weapon, but a set of car keys and a different, bulkier phone. The decision was made. She could not remain detached. The contract on Elara Morrow was an abomination, and she would not let it stand. She was no longer the assassin hired to kill the sunshine. She was the shadow that would now protect it. Part 4. Collision. For 3 days, Nix Voss shadowed Elara Morrow like a second shadow, darker and more deliberate than the one the sun cast. She learned the rhythm of Elara Morrow's life, the morning run through the park, the volunteer shifts, the late afternoon visits to a cozy little artisanal coffee shop on a cobblestone street, the daily grind. The name made Nix Voss's eye twitch. It was all so wholesome. She'd identified the perfect point of interception. The alley beside the coffee shop was narrow, poorly lit, and had a blind spot from the main street just large enough for a quick, decisive maneuver. It was a place designed for things that weren't meant to be seen. Nix Voss's plan was a work of brutal, efficient art. She would wait. She would create a minor distraction, A trash can knocked over. A car alarm triggered up the street. As Ellie Morgan turned, curious, Nyx Voss would move from the recessed doorway where she was concealed. A swift, precise application of pressure to the brachial plexus, a painless, temporary nerve pinch, would render Ellie Morgan disoriented and silent. She would guide her, seeming to any distant observer like a helpful friend, into the waiting sedan, idling just feet away. Clean, clinical, a ghost making another vanish. She watched from the shadows as Ellie Morgan exited the daily grind, a cheerful ceramic mug now replaced with a disposable cup in her hand. She was smiling, saying goodbye to the barista through the glass door. Nyx Voss's muscles coiled, ready to execute the first step of her flawless plan. And then Ellie Morgan stopped. She wasn't heading towards the alley mouth. She was frowning, digging in her purse. She pulled out her phone, her smile fading into a look of concern. She leaned against the brick wall of the alley, completely oblivious, and put the phone to her ear. No, Nyx Voss whispered, her plan evaporating. Not there. Move. But Ellie Morgan didn't move. She was having a conversation, her free hand gesturing slightly. She was rooted to the spot, now directly in the one place that made Nyx Voss's clean extraction impossible. A cold frustration, sharp and acidic, rose in Nyx Voss's throat. Her mind, a supercomputer of violence and strategy, scrambled for a contingency. Every option was messier, riskier, more visible. Abort. Wait for the next opportunity. The professional directive was clear, but the image of another assassin, a crudder, messier tool, flashed in her mind. Castian Drake's threat was a clock ticking in her head. She didn't have time for another opportunity. A new, reckless, and utterly stupid plan formed in an instant. It was born of desperation and a strange, burning need to shatter Elara's perfect, sunny world herself, rather than let some brute do it. She stepped out of the shadows and walked straight towards Ellie Morgan, her posture rigid, her eyes locked on the coffee cup in Ellie Morgan's hand. She calculated the angle, the velocity, the precise point of impact. She didn't bump into her. It was a collision. Nyx Voss's shoulder connected with Elara's arm with a force that was far from accidental. The cardboard cup exploded between them, a geyser of scalding hot latte soaking Elara's buttercup yellow sweater and splattering across Nyx Voss's dark trench coat. Ellie gasped, stumbling back against the brick wall, her phone clattering to the curbstone. Oh my goodness, I'm so... She cut off as she looked up, her apology dying on her lips. Her eyes met Nyx Voss. They were wide, not with anger, but with startled confusion, and in them, Nyx Voss saw a flicker of something else, a primal, instinctual recognition of danger. The lamb sensing the wolf, even in disguise. Nyx Voss didn't apologize. She didn't break character. Her face was a mask of cold, irritated annoyance. Watch where you're standing, she snapped, her voice a low rasp. It was the wrong thing to say. It was so blatantly, outrageously unfair that it broke through Elara's natural civility. A spark of indignation lit in her blue eyes. I was standing still. You walked right into me, Ellie Morgan retorted, looking down at her ruined sweater. The shock was giving way to flustered anger. Perfect. This is a thorough affair, not a phone booth, Nyx Voss counted, her tone dripping with contempt. She took a step closer, invading Elara's space. The move was aggressive, calculated to provoke and disorient. Do you make a habit of clogging up alleyways? Ellie Morgan's mouth opened and closed. Her sunny composure was truly shattered now, replaced by bewildered frustration. Are you insane? You ruined my sweater. It wasn't I saw anyway, Nyx Voss said. And in that moment, she saw it. A flash of genuine hurt in Elara's eyes beneath the anger. The barb had landed deeper than intended. The wolf felt a strange pang of regret which only fueled her own anger. It was time. The window was open. Nyx Voss's hand shot out, but not to strike. It clamped around Elara Morrow's wrist, not with bone-crushing force, but with an iron, unbreakable grip that communicated one thing: resistance is futile. Elara Morrow's eyes went wide with real fear. "Let go of me. What are you? Help!" Nix Voss yanked her forward, off balance, and simultaneously used her body to shove Elara Morrow deeper into the alley toward the idling car. It was not the graceful clinical extraction she'd planned. It was a brutal, shocking abduction. "Stop struggling. It will only be worse," Nix Voss hissed, her voice low and lethal in Elara's ear as she wrestled the stronger-than-expected woman toward the car. She popped the rear door open with her free hand. "Please don't take my purse." "Whatever you want," Elara Morrow begged, tears now mingling with a coffee stain on her cheek. With a final powerful heave, Nix Voss shoved her into the back seat. Elara Morrow scrambled backward, kicking out wildly. Nix Voss caught her ankle and pushed her fully inside, diving in after her and slamming the door shut. The child locks engaged with a definitive thunk. The world inside the car was suddenly silent, save for Elara Morrow's ragged, terrified sobs and the hum of the engine. Nix Voss turned in the passenger seat to face her. Elara Morrow was pressed against the far door, curled into a ball, her body shaking. She looked small, fragile. The vibrant laughing woman from the shelter was gone, replaced by a raw nerve of fear. Nix Voss's own heart was hammering against her ribs, a traitorous adrenaline-fueled rhythm she usually only associated with a firefight. She took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing her pulse down. She had to regain control of the situation of herself. "Calm down," Nix Voss said, her voice returning to its flat, analytical monotone. It sounded alien in the tense space. "I'm not going to rob you or rape you or kill you. Not today, anyway." Elara Morrow stared at her, her breath catching in hiccups. What do you want?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm a problem solver," Nix Voss stated, watching her closely. "And you have a very specific, very expensive problem." She let the words hang in the air. Elara Morrow just stared uncomprehending. "Someone hired me," Nix Voss continued, her gaze unwavering. "They paid a great deal of money for specific outcome. Your permanent removal from the equation." The color drained from Elara Morrow's face, leaving her pale as milk. The fear in her eyes deepened into a bottomless horror. Who? Nix Voss leaned forward slightly, the movement making Elara Morrow flinch. "That's the interesting part. It wasn't a business rival. It wasn't a scorned lover." She paused, ensuring she had every ounce of Elara Morrow's shattered attention. "The client was your brother, Elara Morrow. Lucian Morrow. He wants you dead." For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement. It felt like the senses were too vast, too terrible to fit inside Elara's sense of the world. They rebounded off the bright, generous rooms of her mind, unable to take hold. Then they did. It wasn't a dramatic wail. It was a small, broken noise, like a porcelain doll splintering. One ragged breath left her, and then the tears arrived in a silent, ruinous rush. She didn't scream. She seemed to fold inward, her body buckling under the weight of betrayal. She accepted it instantly and entirely. The truth of it was etched in her absolute devastation. Nix Voss watched, her own stomach tightening into a cold knot. She was accustomed to fear, to rage, to pleading. This was grief. It was a foreign land to her, and she owned no map. Elara Morrow wept, her shoulders quaking, her face buried in her hands, the latte stain on her sweater appearing like a pathetic ordinary wound over the mortal one she'd just suffered. Nix Voss shifted uneasily, the quiet stretched, interrupted only by Elara Morrow's soft, heartbroken sobs. The assassin, the ghost, the instrument, felt a strange and powerful urge to make it stop. This wasn't a variable she'd priced or anticipated in any contingency chart. She cleared her throat. The sound was awkward in the hushed car. "Look, crying is counterproductive. It won't alter the facts. Ellie Morgan cried harder. Nix Voss raked a hand through her hair. Frustration and an emotion suspiciously like guilt warring within her. This is worse than a firefight. Please. Stop crying, she said, her voice uncharacteristically strained. She gestured vaguely, helplessly, at the crumpled form in her back seat. You're making me feel like I kicked a puppy. It was the worst possible thing to say. It was also perhaps the most honest. Part 5. Hiding out. The safe house was a shrine to efficiency, and to Nix Voss, it was ideal. A single open plan room on the top floor of a nondescript downtown high-rise. It offered a 270-degree panorama of the city, excellent for sight lines, terrible for snipers. The walls were bare, gunmetal gray. The floor was polished concrete, cold and unyielding beneath the feet. The furnishings consisted of a steel-framed bed with a thin military-grade mattress, a reinforced metal desk supporting her bank of computer monitors, and a single rigid chair. In the kitchenette, a lone mug, a plate, and a set of utilitarian cutlery set drying in the rack. There were no photographs, no art, no cushions. It was a machine for living, and Nix Voss was its primary component. She all but hauled Ellie Morgan. Inside, the key card beeping as the heavy door clicked shut behind them, engaging multiple deadbolts with a series of solid, final-sounding thunks. Home sweet home, Nix Voss said, her voice flat. She released Ellie's arm and moved straight to the bank of windows, activating a console that caused the electrochromic glass to tint, dimming the afternoon sun to a soft gray glow. She made a quick practice circuit of the room, testing the perimeter sensor she'd installed. Ellie Morgan stood rooted just inside the doorway, hugging herself. Her eyes, still red-rimmed from crying, scanned the sterile environment with a kind of horrified fascination. She looked like a tropical bird that had been shoved into a freezer. This is where you live. Ellie Morgan's voice was small, echoing slightly in the vast empty space. It's where I exist when I'm not working, Nix Voss corrected, not looking up from her sensor readout. There's a bathroom through that door. Blankets in the trunk at the foot of the bed. The fridge has water and nutritional paste. Do not open the door for anyone. Do not approach the windows. Do not try to leave. Ellie Morgan finally took a tentative step further in, her shoes making a soft scuffing sound on the concrete. She ran a finger over the cold surface of the kitchen counter and shuddered. It's so clean and cold. Her gaze fell on the single mug. You only have one cup. I only have one mouth, Nix Voss replied, her tone implying Ellie Morgan had just stated the most obvious fact in the world. But what if you have company? Nix Voss finally turned to look at her, one eyebrow arched. I don't. The reality of her situation seemed to crash down on Ellie Morgan again. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. Right? Because you usually kill them. The words were spoken without malice, just a numb, stark comprehension. A tense silence fell. Nix Voss went back to her computers, her fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up traffic cam feeds, police band chatter, anything related to the alley. She was a vortex of focused energy. Ellie Morgan was a statue of despair. After an hour, the silence was broken by a sound. Nix Voss's body was not programmed to recognize a stomach growling. It was loud in the quiet room. Nix Voss glanced over. Ellie Morgan had sunk onto the floor, her back against the bed frame, looking small and lost. There's nutritional paste in the fridge, Nix Voss stated. Vanilla or unflavored. It's efficient. Ellie Morgan made a face, a flicker of her old spirit breaking through the gloom. That sounds deeply sad. Do you have any actual food? Eggs, pasta, anything. Food is fuel. That paste is optimized fuel. Food is also joy, Nix Voss, community, comfort. Ellie Morgan pushed herself up, a new determination on her face. The ours was used to solving problems, and the most immediate problem was this culinary wasteland. I can't fix my brother wanting me dead right now, but I can fix dinner. before Nix Voss could stop her. Ellie Morgan was marching to the fridge and yanking it open. She stared inside at the rows of identical silver pouches, bottled water, and a half-empty bag of black coffee beans. Her shoulders slumped. "You're a monster." "I'm practical," Nix Voss countered, though she felt an odd pang at the declaration. "This is a cry for help." Ellie Morgan closed the fridge and turned, planting her hands on her hips. "Right? We need supplies. We are not going anywhere." "You are not going anywhere," Ellie Morgan corrected, a surprising steel in her voice. "I am not a prisoner. I'm a guest. A guest you kidnapped to save from your own murderous profession. The least you can do is let me cook us a proper meal so I don't die of despair before your colleagues get here." She located Nix Voss's burner phone on the desk. "I'll order a delivery. What do you like?" Nix Voss opened her mouth to refuse to lock the phone down to reassert control, but the word despair snagged on something inside her. She saw the determined set of Ellie Morgan's jaw, the way this mundane task was giving her a lifeline back to herself. Fighting her on this seemed counterproductive. "I'm indifferent," Nix Voss said finally, turning back to her screens. "Order what you want. Use the encrypted payment app and make sure they leave it at the door." An hour later, the sterile safe house was filled with the alien wondrous smell of garlic sautéing in butter. Ellie Morgan, having commandeered the kitchenette, was a whirlwind of activity. She'd ordered a staggering array of groceries and now hummed as she chopped fresh herbs. A simple pasta dish coming together in the single pan Nix Voss owned. Nix Voss watched from her desk, her concentration fractured. The rhythmic thump-thump of the knife on the cutting board, the sizzle from the stove, the soft humming. It was a sensory assault on her fortified world. She felt invaded, and yet she couldn't bring herself to stop it. When Ellie Morgan placed a bowl of steaming pasta in front of her, garnished with fresh basil, Nix Voss stared at it like it was a complex explosive device. "It's not going to bite you," Ellie Morgan said softly, taking a seat on the floor next to the desk with her own bowl. "It's just carbonara." Cautiously, Nix Voss took a bite. The flavors exploded on her tongue. Rich, salty, creamy, alive. It was a universe away from the bland, efficient paste. She didn't realize she'd eaten the entire bowl until she looked down and found it empty. Ellie Morgan was watching her with a small, triumphant smile. "See, joy." The dam began to break that night. Nix Voss, stretched on the thin mattress on the floor. She'd given Ellie Morgan the bed in a move that felt strangely chivalrous. Was jolted awake by the familiar specter of a nightmare, a flash of a past mission gone wrong, the feeling of blood on her hands. She sat bolt upright, a gasp caught in her throat, her body tense and sweating. A soft voice came from the bed. "Nix Voss, are you okay?" "Fine," she bit out, her voice rough with sleep and shame. "Go back to sleep." But Ellie Morgan didn't. The next thing Nix Voss felt was a warm hand on her tense shoulder. She flinched violently, her combat reflexes screaming. "It's just me," Ellie murmured. Her hands, gentle but firm, began to knead the rock-hard muscles of Nix Voss's shoulders and back. "You're all nuts. Just relax." Nix Voss wanted to shrug her off, to snap that she didn't need coddling, that this was a weakness she couldn't afford. But the warmth of Ellie Morgan's hands was a narcotic. The skilled pressure was melting the frozen dread in her spine. A low, involuntary groan escaped her, and she hated herself for it. She slowly, reluctantly, allowed herself to relax under the ministrations, her head dropping forward. "See?" Ellie Morgan whispered. "Not so bad." The next evening, Nix Voss was again at her computers, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tracked the digital footprints of the assassin Castian Drake might send. She was so focused she didn't hear Ellie Morgan approach, until a warm weight settled on the arm of her chair. "You've been staring at that screen for 8 hours, Ellie said. "You're going to get a migraine." For part 2, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell.